Joining us now to explain how this could boost emissions in Canada is Dale Beugin. He is the Executive Vice President of the Canadian Climate Institute, and he joins us from Ottawa. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dale.
My pleasure. Good morning.
So, Dale, let's start with this. We're seeing Canadian communities being threatened by these severe climate change effects, and yet Canada is ramping up its pipeline production, which could mean an increase in Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. What do you make of that?
I think there's lots to unpack there, Chris. I think the smoke, the fires, they're making it crystal clear that the costs of climate change are real, they're tangible. Like even the smoke alone in the last couple of weeks is a matter of hundreds of millions of dollars per year in each of Alberta, Ontario, BC, Quebec, due to health implications. That's just the tip of the iceberg for the costs of a changing climate for Canadians, and reinforces the need to be proactive, to get ahead by delivering on Canadian emissions reductions alongside international emissions reductions, while also preparing and getting ready to adapt.
And Dale, give us your insight on this. So the federal government's own data says that the oil and gas sector accounts for 30% of the country's total greenhouse gas emissions. What would more pipelines, in your opinion, mean for how often or severe these kinds of weather events are?
Well, it's going to be global emissions rather than Canadian emissions alone that are going to be driving that increase in climate impacts, increase in climate costs. But it is very clear that continuing on the global emissions trajectory that we're on of emissions not decreasing to net zero means that we're going to continue to see these kinds of impacts. In fact, they're going to get worse. This is a harbinger of future impacts. They're going to be more severe and more catastrophic and more costly for Canadians. There's a huge imperative to get the world on track to net zero, and that includes Canada.
And on that point, Dale, your organization came out with a report showing how much Canada's infrastructure is vulnerable, and that investments to adapt the roads, bridges, storm sewers, and water treatment systems could save some money. How would that work?
Absolutely. Proactive adaptation has to be part of Canada's strategy at this point. And so that means identifying priorities. It means identifying where the impacts of a changing climate are going to be most acute, where those flood risks are real, where those fire risks are going to be most affecting vulnerable Canadians. And it means dedicating resources and planning to get ahead of it. So that is all the way through, from very proactive work to proactive burns, to protecting critical infrastructure and critical roadways for escape, to articulating plans for early warning systems, to being prepared to help Canadians when they need it most. That's all part of an adaptation strategy, and it's all work that Canada needs to accelerate.
And Dale, what do you want to see from Carney's government or provincial governments right now as the country continues to deal with these extreme weather events?
I think it has to be an even-handed approach of both what we call adaptation, being resilient to a changing climate, as well as mitigation of reducing emissions and making progress in building that net zero system. So that, on one hand, is funding the national adaptation strategy and deliberately identifying those big priorities for adaptation and moving into implementation really quickly. On the other hand, it is also about building the net zero system that Canada needs to thrive as the world moves towards that new system of low emissions. And that means building electricity systems. It means doubling or even tripling the scale of Canada's electricity systems. It means ensuring that the policies that create incentives to reducing emissions, that's methane regulations, it is industrial carbon pricing, it is clean electricity regulations, making sure those policies are robust and send strong signals to investors and to industry that reducing emissions makes sense for them and for the markets, as well as for Canada overall.
All right. Thank you so much for the conversation. Dale Beugin, Executive Vice President of the Canadian Climate Institute.